Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
Good morning. You're listening to The Weekly with me, Sam Marshall. And as you know, on a Tuesday, we engage with authors. And it's my privilege this week to continue that engagement with an author who's written something that we're going to discuss in as much detail as we can without giving away the details of the book, because ultimately we want you to go and buy it. The author this morning is Silke Kaiser, and the book is called Gotcha. This book, as it says on the jacket, makes for riveting reading, and I think it really is an interesting story. It's a female polygraphist who lifts the lid on crime in South Africa. Silke, thank you very much for joining me on The Weekly.
Good morning.
Maybe for the benefit of our viewers, I want you to give a brief synopsis, but I don't want to give away too much of it. Just a little bit of a background in terms of Gotcha.
It took me a year to write the book, and it was actually officially launched on the 12th of December last year. I've worked as a polygraphist for almost 15 years, and the book is based on actual polygraph tests that I've conducted. I've sort of cherry-picked the best of the best. I found that people are quite interested in my stories, and the book is written in a story form, and I've tried to keep it quite simple so that it would make for easy reading, and I think I did achieve that based on the reviews that I've received thus far.
Okay, so you're a polygraphist, but starting out, this was not necessarily something you would have, even if somebody made a bet with you and said, what do you think is a job that you're going to love? And something that you would pick, this would probably not be it. Tell me how you got into polygraphy and how the idea of unearthing the truth and finding the truth was something that hit home with you.
I've always been very, very interested in crime, and in fact, I've read a lot of books about crime, and I also started a criminology degree through UNISA, but I started that degree when I was already a polygraphist. So the way that I wrote the book was... So the way that I got into polygraphy, so it is written in the book, but I'll just touch on it very briefly, is that a friend of mine had a shop and she had a worker there, a woman that I absolutely adored, and I'll talk about how well she dresses in my book.
Yeah, you do.
And yes, I loved her outfits, and she stole money from both of us, and I spoke about how we had to process that information. It was very difficult for us to accept that she had stolen from us because we were so close to her and because we had had personal discussions, so there's an emotional investment, there's almost a friendship, and I have definitely found that most of my clients have struggled to accept that somebody close to them has stolen from them.
And I want to touch on a couple of other stories. We'll talk about Adil and Abdul, that story.
Yes.
We'll talk about some of the farm attacks that you describe in graphic detail. But the most evident thing for me going through all the stories is that people struggle that in most of the instances that you have highlighted, it's the person who's committed the crime as someone, him or her, that they've known for years, that have been trusted, and in many ways, when I'll maybe in a couple of other questions really delve into what happens with the consequences when that relationship breaks down, like Adil and Abdul, where the consequences was really serious.
Yes.
But the perpetrator is always somebody that somebody knows.
In my line of work, definitely. So obviously there's hijackings and home invasions and armed robberies where the people, where the hit squad, as they call themselves, are not known to the victim. But
the contact person is.
The contact person is. So the contact person is the person who will work with you. It's obviously somebody very close, often somebody very close to you. Home invasions, they say about 70% are inside jobs. I do feel that it's higher. So it's often a worker that has worked for you, either new or has worked for you for a number of years. I also talk in my book about trauma bonding. So when I go to a home invasion scene, I will often ask your worker, the person that cleans your house, or somebody who lives in your house or comes to your house every day, do they have a son that's between the ages of 14 and 23, has low levels of education, has not had a strong father figure, and is using drugs, even if it is only dacha? And there's no such thing as only dacha in my mind, but you'll read in my book how anti-dacha I am. And so, or otherwise they are trauma bonded to an intimate partner. So that is an abusive relationship. In my book, I do talk about this trauma relationship in detail.
Yeah.
So these are high-risk employees. So yes, so in the way that I do my work, I go into crime scenes. I am hired by corporates and also by homeowners. So those people, when I'm in touch with, when I'm exposed to crime, where the employee is normally the perpetrator.
I want to touch on some of the stories, but let's just go back very, very quickly to the beginning. You're hired by corporates. You do a lot of farm work through
Farmer tax, yes.
Farmer tax through a gentleman by the name of Lucas Swart.
Yes, Lucas Swart, yes.
We'll talk about that relationship and how it started. But there's something interesting, and I think for a lot of people that don't know how to physically start a business, you were interested, you got trained, flyers didn't work for you, and then what did you do?
I walked the streets, Sam, in a suit and sort of semi-high-heeled shoes. And I took those flyers that nobody would accept at a robot, and I basically knocked on doors. And I would go into receptionists and I would say to them, please may I speak to your CEO or your HR, etc. And actually I got a very good response. And that is how I started my business. I am not a businesswoman. I have a natural knack for slicing through words that people use when they are lying to me. I normally do know it. Business, I'm not business-minded, but I've done it. I don't know how, but I did do it. And literally, it was step by step, putting one step in front of the other and doing the difficult stuff, feeling the fear, but doing it anyway. I have a million sayings. And one of my favorite sayings is, I can make excuses or I can do something, but I can't do both.
Yeah.
And in my book, I talk about that.
You even talk about that too as well, yeah.
Yes.
So there's this experience with your friend in a shop. You obviously interview her assistant. You then find out that the assistant, in actual fact, not only stole from you, but stole from her. And then the question is, for how long has she been taking money or doing things? And then there's this idea that I could do this for a living. And I could, where were you and what was that moment when, I mean, obviously post that scene, where were you where you thought to yourself, I could do this? Because at that point, you've been doing a lot of other jobs already.
Yes.
And you were actually helping your friend out in the shop.
Yes, because I was sort of lost. Had managed to save enough money. I'd worked in an office for 16 years. So we actually polygraphed that lady. And then that fascinated me.
And that process was the catalyst.
And then I phoned quite a few people, quite a few schools about polygraph testing. And then I got hold of Cliff Kutsia. And Cliff Kutsia just sounded so completely disinterested in what I had to say.
You even described that engagement in the book. Yeah.
And I sent it to him and I said, this is what I actually think of you. And he was okay with it.
And funny, years later, you would come to rely on him quite heavily, especially at the beginning when you wanted to kind of work out how accurate your scoring was.
Yes.
And from what you're saying is that by the time you sent it to him, you were pretty on the mark.
Yes. And Cliff, I must say, so once I started the course with him, it took quite a while for me to crack through the wall with him. But I do remember we were on one part, it's called the trust block, where he used a swear word that was absolutely shocking because I'd never even heard him swear. Well, I laughed until I cried. I mean, I might have wet myself a little bit. And after that, we were the best of friends, and I trust Cliff implicitly.
Yeah. So that moment, where were you when you realized that I could do this? This is for me. I was designed as a human being to help people.
It was on the day that she was polygraphed. Okay. I said to Nikki, I'm going to do a course on polygraphy. And I wasn't sure if I would actually take it further. I didn't think that far. And as I was doing that course, I realized, I love this. I love it. And when I started, from the minute that I started testing, and obviously I had somebody to help me at first, because when you do test, you don't just go in. You've got somebody to mentor you. I did it. I knew exactly what to ask. I have natural tendency of interrogation. Actually, let me say questioning. Some people say I interrogate. I say I question gently. They say not at all.
But there is the Silke that got qualified, walked the streets a year in, and then the Silke that describes herself, I was no longer intimidated. It was 4 or 5 years down the line. And there was an incident, I think it was with, I might get the names mixed up. I think it was Joe. Well, with Michelle and Michael. He grew up with Joe, and Joe was very aggressive, wasn't interested in engaging with you.
That was the farm attack, yes.
That was the farm attack.
It was a double homicide.
Talk to me about the Silke in year 1 to the Silke in year 5 and the Silke that's this polygraphist now that's highly experienced.
So when I first started testing, it was very scary for me to actually say that somebody is guilty, because a guilty verdict carries huge jeopardy for that person. The very least, the trust relationship between employer and employee is broken, or there could even be jail. I've had numerous instances, in fact, where people have ended up in jail, obviously not based on the polygraph, but from an ensuing investigation where there's been enough evidence for the magistrate or the judge to say, we can sentence you to 2.5 years or 3 years or 5 years or whatever. So as I became more experienced, I think my brain almost became desensitized to being able to call it and say, this person is guilty. I will never call it unless I'm 120% certain.
But there were instances that you describe that the actions and the mannerisms of the people you're about to engage with gave them away.
Yes.
Or at least pointed you in a direction to say, there was one instance where you said, I was going to interview that lady first because you followed somebody outside and that lady was crying and you actually said, I'll interview her first.
Yes, because that was a giveaway for me. So obviously I've got my intuition, and if I sense that somebody is guilty, I will push for a confession. Confessions are very... there's quite a profile, if I want to use that word, to confessions. There are only certain circumstances under which you can get a confession, and that is normally if a person is involved alone. If there's a syndicate, you will not get a confession, because to be an impempi or to be an informant,
which you described,
it is really the worst thing.
And you've actually you actually do something really amazing, because in more than one occasion with the stories, you've had to use that word and also almost guarantee that person anonymity, safety, in order to be able to share that story. And what comes to mind is the story in the warehouse where there was a syndicate that was stealing copper, and the person that you eventually identified as the ringleader was somebody you didn't expect.
Correct. So that was
the owners didn't expect him.
Yes, that was the Afrikaans manager. So that Afrikaans manager basically worked on his own. He would take the copper by himself. Crime does not cross race. It is very rare for it to cross race. Particularly in countries such as America, rapists will normally rape within their own race group. In South Africa, we're becoming very, very enmeshed. This is changing. That crime, that people will become involved from different race groups in crime. But then that person, for example, I'm going to just say it, like if a white person becomes involved in crime with black people, he would hang out at the Lokshin. So people who don't know what the Lokshin is, it's a location, which is a township. Or they would use drugs together, or they will drink together in a shebeen.
But there's a social element.
There will be that emotional connection. So straight away, if I suspect that there's two people from different race groups, I must know that connection.
Okay.
And then just getting back to my intuition. So I will always use my intuition and then I'll know, okay, red flags are being raised here, the words that this person is using, the body language that is being presented to me, it's making me suspicious. And I will often say to them, I suspect you. I will tell them straight, I suspect you. You are raising red flags for me when you say this. You're not owning what you're saying. You're telling me I don't know nothing, but you're a security officer. You should know about crime scenes and you're telling me you don't know nothing. That does not wash with me. Then I will push for a confession. But my intuition stands for nothing. I have to have that polygraph chart. But when I get to the CCMA, I can't go and say, I had a feeling. They want to know scientific facts.
Yeah.
And rightfully so.
And you talk about intuition, but you also talk about the fact that years later, you've honed it. Like an athlete who has to go to track every day or whatever
a police
discipline.
Officer even
a police officer, you've honed it.
Yes, it comes from experience.
Yeah, and so you've used it quite a couple of times. But there was one incident where what it looked like, in actual fact, it wasn't. And there was an incident where there was a potential attack on a family. You were called in, and you talk about in the book that majority of the times these cases involve wages or so where a person feels hard done by the owner.
Yes.
But this was and we'll talk about it because I don't think it's a major issue in the book, but this was a basic issue around revenge.
Where that son died under the tractor.
Yeah.
Indeed. So that had carried on for years because white people make
6 years, I think.
20 years.
20 years, okay.
So white people think that we can superimpose other cultures onto, our culture onto other cultures. It doesn't work that way. Because the land issue, let me just talk about that. The land issue, a lot of white people will say, but I didn't take your land. But our ancestors took the land, apparently. So I don't know whether, I've got a whole thing about that, but that is what's being presented at the moment, is that the whites took the land many years ago.
Yeah.
And in the black culture, the ancestors are held liable Whereas in the white culture, that is totally foreign to us. So with that death, that was a young man who had joined the farm. He had been employed on the farm, and I think it was on the first day that he actually fell off that tractor and was killed.
Well, he was an 18-year-old.
Yes,
and he
a
was
youngster.
brought on, because his dad worked there. Yeah.
That's correct. And he died, and then the farmer did not do enough.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was probably why the revenge attack was planned.
Okay, but I'm not going to engage with you on the land issue.
We'll talk about that. No, I don't even know about the land issue, but I'm just talking about not superimposing cultures onto other cultures.
The big focus starts off on how you then get all these jobs, and it starts corporate, and then you meet this gentleman, Lucas Swart, who takes you in, obviously along the same line in terms of polygraphy testing, but he brings in a brand new aspect where you don't mention at the beginning because I don't think it was on your radar, and then you start engaging with the issues of not only dealing with farm attacks but preventing it, and I think that in itself is maybe the word art form is wrong, but a skill to be able to prevent attacks and be able to infiltrate and get enough information to prevent that. How did that engagement with Lucas come about? And talk to me about the very first case Lucas brought you in on.
All right, so I actually gave a talk, I'm sure I can mention the company, to a company called Group 5 about lie detection. And Lucas Swart was in that talk. It suddenly
mentioned it, yeah.
So what happened is I'd made an appointment and I spoke to the person that was responsible for the polygraph testing. And he said to me, would you be prepared to speak to a few of my colleagues? And suddenly it was a public speaking engagement. Stepped up to the plate, spoke about my information that I know, about how lie detection works. Lucas Swart then approached me and said, what do you know about farm attacks? So I said very little. And he then started to explain to me how the farm attacks are planned, which is described in meticulous detail in my book.
Talk about the hit squad, the contact person.
The meticulous planning, the watching in the woods.
Things, yeah.
Yes.
And then there were other things that I've never even thought about, which we'll touch on after the advert, but little things. In the one instance, I think it was the domestic worker or the helper closing the curtains, dogs barking for weeks on end.
Or days on end, yes.
Days on
that
end.
Is a sign. It's a warning sign for farmers. I've done a video as well about farm attacks. I counted it as far as I could, 5.5 million views. Yeah. I hadn't even done my hair, Sam, on that. It was such a impromptu video that I did. But yes, so if the lady who works in your house is closing your curtains at a certain time, she's giving those farmers, the wife and the husband, a message. You're being watched. The hit squad is watching you. The watch in the woods is watching you. And she cannot say it to them, but that is the way she gives the message.
But more importantly, what you're saying is that the people working around you know that there's an attack coming.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
On a farm attack, all the employees will know about it. It does not mean that they're all involved. So when I go and polygraph for a farm attack, I'm extremely careful. I will only ask questions about who is going to benefit materially from that farm attack. Farm attacks are not racist. It is not genocide. The main aim is guns, money and jewellery, so it's robbery. And the torture, the rape and the murder is pre-planned with the hit squad and the contact people. Contact people are the employees on the farms. Hit squad are the people who perpetrate the atrocities. And the bloodlust that we see on a huge increase has been directly linked to the politicians who call for blood of the farmers, who call for the death of the farmers. It definitely has an impact on farm attacks.
Okay, we'll unpack some of those issues. We're about to take an ad break. You're listening to The Weekly with me, Sam Marshall, and our guest is Silke Kaiser. She wrote a book called Gotcha, and we'll find out towards the end of the show where you can find it. I'm sure you can order it from her directly. We'll take an ad break.
brandlive.co.za.
Have you ever thought about the power of social media? Social media has the power to make your business grow. Yeah. Why don't you let us manage your social media? Because our business is to see your business grow. Visit us at www.bstownmedia.co.za.
Making a bold statement yet blending into the surrounding suburbs of Melville, 27 Boxes is a realization of edgy design and practical implementation. A radical departure from the shopping malls of our generation, yet not a return to the high streets of our youth. 27 Boxes showcases the best of a shopping centre set in a garden, surrounded by the bohemian suburb that is Melville. 27 Boxes, shop, play, eat. You're listening to brandlive.co.za.
We continue our discussion on the weekly with me, Samm Marshall. Our guest, as you know, every Tuesday we talk to authors that come from a very interesting perspective or write a story or have a particular narrative that we haven't heard before. This morning I'm talking to Silke Kaiser. She's written a book called Gotcha. And we ended up off the conversation talking about hit squads and the kind of stuff that Silke learned with a gentleman by the name of Lucas Swart, who actually brought her onto the first farm attack case. It's now years later, you've become an expert in farm attack prevention and farm attacks. But there is a story you describe in the book, and I don't want to give everything away. Mm-hmm. But there's a story, and there's two stories, but I'll talk about the farm attack story first, involving Michael and Michelle.
Yes. And
I think your description is anybody with a heart goes out to them.
Absolutely.
Because not only are you dealing with the level of violence, but it's so fresh, and you are dealing with it as the cops arrive, as everybody's there. Have you, in this period of time dealing with farm attacks and farm preventions, have you ever been stunned yourself?
What do you mean stunned?
I mean, where the
shock is so bad.
Shock is so bad, and just kind of being overwhelmed by this, by the amount of loss.
All right. So in that story with Michael and Michelle, I definitely was. I was actually. I don't think I mentioned in my book. I was actually vomiting throughout that day because I was actually quite distraught because.
But you did talk about the fact that you went to go see a psychologist.
Yes.
At some point.
Yes. So the psychologist was after Abdul. Yeah. So yes, I don't see a psychologist anymore. I just went to see after that Abdul story because that was also a very, very bad ending. And I learned a big lesson there. But with Michael and Michelle, that, I can tell you this, Sam, is that I am fiercely attracted to danger. And I love crime scenes. I enjoy crime. My brain is wired for it. It does not mean that I don't have major compassion. I have enormous compassion, especially for farmers who are under threat. And I just want to also mention that I hardly ever go to a farm when an attack has already occurred. So with this one, the attack had already occurred. It was successful. Normally when I go to farm attacks, Lucas gets the information through Impimpies and maybe other methods, and he will write a report. I will get that report, and he will tell me what is going on. So the information that he's given through the Impimpies, which is informants, is exactly what the hit squad will get. So I know exactly what is being planned. So when I go and do those polygraphs, I am prepared. I know what's going to go down. I know what's planned. And the employees who are involved are stunned. I want to talk about the employees who are not involved. Often I will go and they will give me a hint. Very recently I went to a farm and the one lady said to me, out of the blue, I asked her something arbitrary and she just blurted out. She says, I don't know what happens in the shebeen. She was telling me the plan is being originated in the shebeen. The farmer and I went to the shebeen and we gave those people a message and we said to them, we are going to go to the Sangoma. Anybody who continues planning this farm attack, where this is planned, that is planned, and these are the dates, these are the times, because that's the information we get as well, they are going to have a very bad headache and their stomach will never be right again. And psychosomatically it works because the next day, 2 of the farm workers could not come to work. Very bad headache, their stomach was not right. So I do laugh. I have to push the envelope, I do push the envelope in my work.
but it's the willingness to be able to assess the situation on the ground, because in more than one occasion you've lied a little.
Oh no, I do lie when I test. Oh no, 100%. I will lie to people left, right and centre. I hope none of my subjects are listening to me, but I will exaggerate. I will say, for example, you are telling me you were hijacked by a silver polo, and yet when I went to the company down the road where you said you were hijacked, I've checked the camera, we don't see that at all. So exactly where were you hijacked? And there's been no camera at all. So I will tell lies like that to assist me to get confessions or to assist me to put that person in a corner.
But I've got to get tough with you. There was a moment, and maybe this is the question I need to ask, and I'll phrase it in 2 ways. How emotionally connected do you get to the stories? Because on 2 instances, or I think one instance you were cursed or somebody tried to curse you.
Yes, the witchcraft, yes.
Yeah, they tried to curse you, and in another instance, you found some witchcraft material on a property and then used that.
Yes, so what happened is that on the one farm, so the thread of the belief in witchcraft runs its thread throughout crime in South Africa. Let me rephrase that. So the belief in witchcraft runs its thread throughout crime in South Africa, especially on farm attacks. So the farm attack hit squads are normally made up of Zimbabweans who do not really believe in sangomas and witchcraft, and the South Africans, many of them do believe in it. I cannot say if witchcraft works or not. I don't know. But I do take my chances because, I'm fearless. I'm fiercely attracted to danger. Let's not forget that. Some people might just say, Silke, you are very, very stupid. So on this one particular farm attack, it was a husband and wife who had organised this plan, and that was actually with a tractor story with that young man. It was a revenge one. So what happened is that she had placed Muti with a monkey skull on a table.
I actually felt sorry for that husband and wife because they were roped in, and you describe it in your book, they were roped into something where they've had a very good relationship with those farmers.
That's right.
Yeah, sorry.
That's right. So
that's to
they
distract
are
you, but
influenced, So
but you were talking about the kind of witchcraft having its thread in crime. Yeah.
So, and the monkey skull, and I lost my temper completely. Yeah. Now, some people might say that's unprofessional. It probably is, but farm attacks
That's
are
what
very,
I thought, and that's why I wanted to ask you that question.
Well, I've taken the word out of your mouth, Sam.
There are like 2 or 3 instances where you were highly unprofessional, where you were threatening the woman and her kids for 100 years. Because they were trying to,
So that's what I do, because I do get very angry. I try not to, but it's very difficult to not get emotionally attached, especially in farm attacks. So what I did is I swept it all off the table and I said to her, now this is the white woman's curse. Whatever you cursed here, it's going to be on you and all the children of your children and their children for the next 100 years, and this is the white woman's curse. So she was a little bit shaken, and the security guard and the police officer who was standing there were a little bit taken aback. Yeah. But Sam, to be honest with you, I get to a point where I don't care. I do have a cold spot inside me, and that is a spot where I just do not care about consequences, or I don't care how it makes people feel.
How big is that cold spot now in comparison to when you started a year ago? Oh, when you started in your first year?
I think I've had this cold spot since I was a child.
Okay.
And in fact, a psychologist years ago asked me to draw myself, and I drew 2 boxes, and I said, there's a space in between where a part of me is missing. Yeah. So I think that's it. The cold spot is sometimes big, and sometimes it's small, and sometimes it's not there at all.
Yeah. I've got 5 minutes left.
Yes.
In this 5 minutes, I want to talk about distribution, all that stuff. But I want to talk about the one thing that I think in this book shook you to your core and made you go and get professional help.
Yes.
It was so traumatic, and I think the Silke of now would deal with it very differently, but back then you were a bit of a novice still. When you unearthing the truth, and rightfully or wrongfully, that person ended up taking their life.
Yes, he did.
How did that knock you?
It knocked me sideways, and still even now I can feel that emotion. I can feel the goosebumps. I'm still very, very sorry that I did not stay behind and that I did not give him insist that he got the psychological care that he needed. If I got a confession from him, and if I even sense that there's trouble in the land and that the headspace has become very difficult for that person, I will not leave until a psychologist or a counsellor has been called to go and assist that person. That really knocked me, and it's nearly, I think, 12 years later, and I still cannot think of that without just feeling that the whole thing was so wrong and that I erred in that, especially since his daughter found him.
Yeah. Process in terms of writing this book. How has this been a cleansing experience for you? Has this been a catharsis in many ways?
I love my job. Polygraph honestly nourishes my soul. Okay. I will lie on my deathbed and I will say I did what I loved, because this makes me feel as if I have a life. I'm extremely FOMO. I have a fear of missing out. I always think I should be somewhere else, always. So this book poured out of me. And as I was writing it, I thought, jeepers, I've really had a life here. This has really exposed me to stuff that a lot of people are not exposed to.
And it's made you tough.
And yes, and stuff that I love.
Okay. Where can people get it? How can they get their hands on it?
All right, they can go onto my Facebook page, Crime Uncovered, and they can order directly from me or otherwise from Scoops. There's also a shop in Alberton that's stocking it. That's also on Crime Uncovered. And I'm in talks with a distributor, which I will be meeting again with tomorrow. And then we're going to rock and roll with that.
And then, of course, they can follow you on Twitter. Your Twitter handle is?
As Silke Kaiser.
And Facebook?
Crime Uncovered.
Crime Uncovered. Okay, and the website?
No website.
You're still developing
Yes.
it. Okay, so the book is called Gotcha. It's at Scoobs in Monte Casino. By the way, Scoobs is a really lovely place if you haven't been there. Or you can get a copy of a book, grab a cup of coffee and chill and get through the first 4 or 5 chapters. Silke Kaiser is my guest on the weekly with Gotcha. The book is out. Go and find out more details. Crime Uncovered on Facebook and read it. And before we wrap, very quickly, you're busy with another book quickly?
Yes, I am.
Yeah?
About sociopaths.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. It's on a cliffhanger. That's the weekly with me, Samm Marshall.
Thank you, Samm.
Harnessing the power of talk radio. Brandlive.co.za